Well, alright, let's dive in with another of Grimm's complete or fairy tales reading. That's right, but first we set the mood as we all too often do, getting the lights out, getting the fire crackling element going, and doing a little bit of Suzuki Harp there. All right, yes, sir. What are we reading tonight? Well, let's just turn the pages and find out. Oh, here it is. The Queen Bee. We got a couple shorties tonight, so there'll be another one after that, too. So get comfortable. The Queen Bee. Two kings' sons who sought adventure fell into a wild, reckless way of living and gave up all thoughts of going home again. Their third and youngest brother, who was called a Whitling and had remained behind, started off to seek them, and when at last he found them, they jeered at his simplicity in thinking that he could make his way in the world, while they who were so much cleverer were unsuccessful. But they all three went on together until they came to an ant-hill, which the two eldest wished to stir up, that they might see the little ants hurry about in their fright and carrying off their eggs. But Whitling said, "Leave them little creatures alone. I will not suffer them to be disturbed." And they went on farther until they came to a lake, where a number of ducks were swimming about. The two eldest brothers wanted to catch a couple and cook them, but Whitling would not allow it, and said, "Leave their creatures alone. I will not suffer them being killed." And then they came to a bee's nest in a tree, and there was so much honey in it that it overflowed and ran down the trunk. Two eldest brothers then wanted to make a fire beneath the tree, that the bees might be stifled by the smoke, and then they could get at the honey. But Whitling prevented them, saying, "Leave the little creatures alone. I will not suffer them to be stifled." At last the three brothers came to a castle where they were in the stables many horses standing, all of stone. And the brothers went through all the rooms until they came to a door at the end secured with three locks, and in the middle of the door a small opening through which they could look into the room. And they saw a little gray-haired man sitting at a table. They called out to him once, twice, but he did not hear. But at the third time he got up, undid the locks, and came out. Without speaking a word, he led them to a table loaded with all sorts of good things. And when they had eaten and drunk, he showed to each his bedchamber. The next morning the little gray man came to the eldest brother, and beckoning him, brought him to a table of stone, on which were written three things directed by what means the castle could be delivered from its enchantment. The first thing was that in the wood under the moss lay the pearls belonging to the princess, 1,000 in number, and they were to be sought for and collected, and if he who should undertake the task had not finished it by sunset, but if one pearl were missing, he must be turned to stone. So the eldest brother went out and searched all day, but at the end of it he had only found 100, and just as was said on the table of stone came to pass, and he was turned into stone. The second brother undertook the adventure next day, but it fared with him no better than with the first. He found 200 pearls and was turned to stone. And so at last it was Whitling's turn, and he began to search in the moss, but it was very tedious business to find the pearls, and he grew so out of heart that he sat down on a stone and began to weep. And as he was sitting thus, up came the Ant King with 5,000 ants, whose lives had been saved through Whittling's pity. And it was not long after before the little insects had collected all the pearls and put them in a heap. Now the second thing ordered by the table of stone was to get the key of the princess's sleeping chamber out of the lake. And when Whitling came to the lake, the ducks whose lives he had saved came swimming, and dived below and brought up the key from the bottom. The third thing that had to be done was the most difficult, and this was to choose out the youngest and loveliest of the three princesses as they lay sleeping. All bore a perfect resemblance to each other, and only differed in this, that before they went to sleep each one had eaten a different sweet meat, the eldest a piece of sugar, the second a little syrup, and the third a spoonful of honey. Now the queen bee of whose bees that Whitling had protected from the fire came at this moment, and trying the lips of all three settled on those of the one that had eaten the honey. And so it was that the king's son knew which to choose. Then the spell was broken, and every one awoke from a stony sleep, and took his right form again. And Whitling married the youngest and loveliest princess, and became king after her father's death. But his two brothers had to put up with the other two sisters. All right, and our next tale, The Golden Goose. There was once a man who had 3 sons, the youngest of whom was called the Simpleton, and was despised, laughed at, and neglected on every occasion. It happened one day that the eldest son wished to go into the forest to cut wood, and before he went his mother gave him a delicious pancake and a flask of wine, that he might not suffer from a hunger or thirst. And when he came into the forest, a little old gray man met him, who wished him good day, and says, "Give me a bit of cake out of your pocket, and let me have a drink of your wine. I am so hungry and thirsty." But the prudent youth answered, Give you my cake and my wine? I haven't got any. Be off with you." And leaving the little man standing there, he went off. Then he began to fell a tree, but he had not been at it long before he made a wrong stroke, and the hatchet hit him in the arm, so that he was obliged to go home and get it bound up. That was what came of the little gray man. Afterwards, the second son went into the wood, and the mother gave to him, as to the eldest, a pancake and a flask of wine. The little old man met him also, and begged for a little bit of cake and a drink of wine. But the second son spoke out plainly, saying, "What I give you I lose myself, so be off with you." And leaving the little man standing there, he went off. The punishment followed. As he was chopping away at the tree, he hit himself in the leg so severely that he had to be carried home. Then said the simpleton, "Father, let me go for once into the forest to cut wood." And the father answered, "Your brothers have hurt themselves by doing so. Give it up. You understood nothing about it." But the simpleton went on begging so long that the father said at last, "Well, be off with you. You only learn by experience." The mother gave him a cake. It was only made with water and baked in the ashes, and with it a flask of sour beer. When he came into the forest, with the little gray man met him, and greeted him, saying, "Give me a bit of your cake and a drink from your flask. I am so hungry and thirsty." And the simpleton answered, I have only a flour and water cake and sour beer, but if that is good enough for you, well, let us sit down together and eat." Then they sat down, and the simpleton took out his flour and water cake, and it became a rich pancake, and his sour beer became good wine. Then they ate and drank, and afterwards the little man said, "As you have such a kind heart, and share what you have so willingly, I will bestow good luck upon you. Yonder stands an old tree. Cut it down, and its roots you will find something, and at its roots you will find something rather. And thereupon the little man took his departure. The simpleton went there and hewed away at the tree, and when it fell he saw, sitting amongst the roots, a goose with feathers of pure gold. He lifted it out and took it with him to an inn where he intended to stay the night. The landlord had 3 daughters who, when they saw the goose, were curious to know what wonderful kind of bird it was, and ended by longing for one of its golden feathers. The eldest thought, I will wait for a good opportunity, and then I will pull out one of the feathers for myself. And so when the simpleton was gone out, she seized the goose by its wing, but there her finger and hand had to stay, held fast. And soon after came the second sister with the same idea of plucking out one of the golden feathers for herself. But scarcely had she touched her sister than she also was obliged to stay and hold fast. Last there came the third with the same intentions, but the other screamed out, "Stay away, for heaven's sake, stay away!" But she did not see why she should stay away, and thought, if they do so, why shouldn't I? And went toward them. But when she reached her sisters, there she stopped, hanging on with them, and so they had to stay all night. The next morning the simpleton took the goose under his arm and went away, unmindful of the 3 girls that hung on to it. The 3 had to run after him, left and right, wherever his legs carried him, and in the midst of the fields they met a parson, who, when he saw the procession, said, "Well, shame on you girls, running after a young fellow through the fields like this." And forthwith he seized hold of the youngest by the hand to drag her away, but hardly had he touched her when he too was obliged to run after them himself. Not long after the sexton came that way, and seeing the respected parson following at the heels of the 3 girls, he called out, "Ho, your reverence, whither away so quickly? You forgot that we have another christening today." And he seized hold of him by his gown. But no sooner had he touched him than he was obliged to follow on too. As the 5 trampled on, one after another, 2 peasants with their hoes came up from the fields, and the parson cried after them and begged them to come and set him and the sexton free. But no sooner had they touched the sexton than they had to follow on too. And now there were 7 following the simpleton and the goose. By and by they came to a town where a king reigned, who had an only daughter who was so serious that no one could make her laugh, and therefore the king had given out that whoever should make her laugh should have her in marriage. The simpleton, when he heard this, went with the goose and the hangers-on into the presence of the king's daughter. And as soon as she saw the 7 people following, always one after the other, she burst out laughing, and seemed as if she could never stop. And so the simpleton earned a right to her as his bride. But the king did not like him for a son-in-law, and made all kinds of objections, and said he must first bring a man who could drink up a whole cellar of wine. The simpleton thought that the little gray man would be able to help him, and went to the forest, and there on the very spot where he felled the tree he saw a man sitting with a very sad countenance. The simpleton asked him what was the matter, and he answers, "I have a great thirst, which I cannot quench. Cold water does not agree with me. I have indeed drunk up a whole cask of wine, but what good is a drop like that?" Then the simpleton said, "I can help you, only come with me and you shall have enough." He took him straight to the king's cellar, and the man sat himself down before the big vats, and drank, and before a day was over, he had drunk up the whole cellar full. And the simpleton asked his bride, but the king was annoyed that a wretched fellow called the simpleton by everybody should carry off his daughter. And so he made new conditions. He was to produce a man who could eat up a mountain of bread. The simpleton did not hesitate long, but ran off quickly to the forest. There in the same place sat a man who had fastened a strap round his body. He made a very pious face, and saying, I have eaten a whole bakehouse full of rolls, but what is the use of that when one is so hungry as I am? My stomach feels quite empty, and I am obliged to strap myself together that I may not die of hunger. The simpleton was quite glad of this, and says, Get up quickly and come along with me, and you shall have enough to eat. He led them straight to the king's courtyard, where all the meal in the kingdom had been collected and baked into a mountain of bread. The man out of the forest settled himself down before it and hastened to eat. And in one day the whole mountain had disappeared. Then the simpleton asked for his bride the third time, and the king, however, found one more excuse, and said he must have a ship that should be able to sail on land or on water. So soon, said he, as you come sailing along with it, you shall have my daughter for your wife. The simpleton went straight to the forest, and there sat the little old gray man with whom he had shared his cake. And he said, I have eaten for you, and I have drunk for you, and I will also give you the ship. And all because you were kind to me at the first. Then he gave him the ship that could sail on land and on water. And when the king saw it, he knew he could no longer withhold his daughter. The marriage took place immediately, and at the death of the king, the simpleton possessed the kingdom, and lived long and happily with his wife. All right. And that has been the Golden Goose from Grimm's Complete Fairy Tales. All right, did you like that fairy tale? I say I liked the both, but there were some redundancies, as the Grimm's brothers are prone to be doing. In any event, let's take us out, shall we? Alright, I have an affiliate link for this down in the descriptor if you want to pick you up your own copy or help support the channel by shopping through it. Either way, I greatly appreciate it. That being said, I just want to end this little video by saying kisses to your missus and a tip of my hat to your old cat. You come on back now again, you hear? You understand? You better. I hope you do. Take care of yourself now.